Now that then leads us to a seventh point, and I'll end with the theologically significant number 7 here. Ultimately, on this one here, it does seem best to see the arrangement of everything that's going on in the universe as being part of a script or part of a plan that God has for the universe. And so there is ultimately a meaning or a purpose for everything that goes on in the universe, right? So that God, at the beginning, had some sort of a reason for creating the universe. He had some sort of a reason for creating us as the kinds of beings that we are, and that everything was foreseen by Him, and this is setting up for Act 2, which is setting up for Act 3, and that ultimately the universe has a grand finale, right? A final climactic event, and that we have to understand ultimately everything that happens within the universe as purposive, as leading up to that grand finale act that God knows about. So that then is to say that the universe as a whole has a purpose. And because of that, we can then interpret all of the particular things that happen within that broader whole as also purposive, the purpose being their contribution to the larger whole. Now, by contrast, when we look at this story, the universe as a whole having a purpose does not fit into the story at all. All right, at this point here, we just have physical processes working their way out, and those are very complicated physical purposes here. But at least as this story is told, there is no mind that has a conception of anything that's going on. There's no psychologically directive force. There's no meaning. This happens for the reason that. There's no teleological or end-directed activity. Instead, what we have is this happens, and then this happens, and this happens, and we can understand cause and effect, but cause and effect in a non-purposive kind of way. There's no deep significance, right, to the formation of helium, right? Helium comes into existence because of these mechanical processes that were going on a little bit earlier. Now, human beings came into existence, but human beings did not come into existence in order to fulfill some ultimate destiny, right, of the universe. And in fact, there is no ultimate destiny, right, of the universe. It's open-ended. There's not necessarily a final act, and it's not necessarily the case that everything that's going on here is for the purpose of having that act. Now, there are purposes in the universe, but they are certainly smaller scale purposes, and they require beings that make choices and have plans and then act in order to achieve those plans. And so we can say that we, as a species and as individuals within the species, we have purposes, but as a species as a whole, there's no reason why we are here, and we are a small part of the universe as a whole, which did not have a reason for bringing us into existence. So the contrast then is to say that the universe as a whole is purposeless. Right? So where do we find meaning? Where do we find purpose? Do we find it in small-scale individuals, or do we see it as a grand cosmological phenomenon with religious significance? All right, now the point of all of this is to be a gentle introduction to the complicated field of metaphysics. What we have here are two narratives, and what's attractive about them is that they are narratives that can be understood without deep scriptural training or without deep scientific training. And the point is that the narratives are compelling. They answer all of the major questions, but also that they contradict each other. And for us as educators living in the kind of culture that we do, in which both of these stories are prevalent, it means that necessarily our mission, right, as educators is going to be fraught with metaphysical conflict, and we have to make various strategic decisions. Are we going to essentially adopt this story? Are we essentially going to adopt this story? Are we going to try to embark on the very hard project of perhaps reconciling the two stories? The only way we can do that is by doing some hard philosophical work, by being aware of the issues. But it's hard philosophical work that we have to do because as teachers, our job is to teach students the important truths. We want them to understand the world as it really is, to understand who they are and why they're here. And the only place that we can get answers to those questions is by doing philosophy, starting with metaphysics, And so what we'll do in our next unit is a more fine-grained look at some metaphysical issues that divide this side from that side. We'll look at two arguments for and against the existence of a God, or the non-existence of a God here, and we'll contrast their strengths and weaknesses, and that will then put us in a position to have a more informed opinion on which way we're going to lean, or which way more strongly we're going to commit metaphysically.